About a year ago, my husband and I were in our bedroom having a discussion. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I know it had to do with spirituality, identifying the type of being and its energy, their intent, and how it makes you feel at the very moment. My husband was standing at the sink in our bathroom, and I was standing in the bathroom doorway to his left, with the left side facing a room. Somehow, I do not recall how, I started talking about possessions, demons, and their names, and for some reason, I Googled a list of demon names. I started at the top of the list and began trying to pronounce the name. Luckily, I suck at pronunciation. Even now, it's kind of difficult. As I've tried a few times to say this name, the more successful I became is when I started to all of a sudden feel an intense energy that consumed the left side of my body, the side that was facing our room. It was as if someone or something ran or flew high speed right up to me, almost in my face. I felt threatened, as if it were daring me, as if it were saying, "Say it, bitch." My left arm felt as if someone was not necessarily grabbing at one spot, but was so close that my whole arm felt tight and tingly and slightly numb. I abruptly stopped trying to say his name and said, "Oh my God," then was silent and literally terrified. I was so scared that I went into the bedroom with my husband while he was still at the sink, sat on the toilet in fear, and kept peeking around my husband, looking into our room for a good minute with what he described as a look of pure fear and concern on my face. This whole time, the tingling, yet almost electrical numbness did not subside. Once that feeling went away, and I worked up enough courage to leave the bathroom, I jumped on our bed and said a little prayer. Even though I was terrified and confused because I had never experienced such an evil presence like that before. I was curious, I guess you could say. I know, very stupid. Anyone else would have said, "Forget this." Well, stupid me attempted to say the next name on the list, but this time in my head. Again, a dark, threatening presence filled the room overall, but not as intense and not so close to me or in my personal space, leaving residual energy in my body, but it was enough for me to go. I give up. My husband, not too long after that, came to me and said he mentioned that demonology had been a serious interest of his. He decided to delve deeper into trying to communicate with them, and he said one in particular's name out loud. He explained that saying the name is giving it power. If you say the demon's name out loud, because it is basically inviting it into your life, your world, and even your soul, with the freedom to stalk, even torment you. He recalled the feeling of constantly being stalked and paranoid, witnessing strange occurrences, even among those close to him. He ended up requesting help from members of a deity and was eventually free from it all. I had never heard of the saying, "Never speak the demon's name out loud," but it makes perfect sense. I owe a lot of what prevented it from happening to lack of good pronunciation skills, and the feeling that I felt in a short amount of time still creeps me out to this day. Back in 2010, me and my friend went outside in his backyard forest, which is a couple acres at most, probably at close to 1 a.m., to go explore. There's a steep cliff when you first walk in. When we were standing at the cliff before the path, it goes down leading to the rest of the forest. I could see a tall, white, illuminated figure, and it was in between two trees, kind of moving around between them. I asked my friend if he saw it. He said yes, he could as well. And then we stood silent in fear, and I could feel impending doom. The best way I can describe it is that feeling you get when someone dies or you are about to die. That feeling of dread inside your chest, like you are helpless. We left very quick because we had no clue what it was, and it scared both of us. I remember my friend yelling something at it, and it was just silently, still, slightly moving between the trees like a slight hover. The figure was pure white and solid, and seemed to be at least 6 to 7 feet tall from where we were standing, which was about 30 to 40 feet away. I am positive it was not a living creature or a human being, and it was not a trick of the mind or light. There was no light nor moon shining in the forest because it was pitch black and filled with pine trees. It had no physical features at all, except for very long arms. It kind of looked like how an ape would have its arms, but they were very long. It was pitch black in the forest, but the whole figure was sort of blurry, giving off a life, like you would look at something out of focus. It wasn't illuminated to the point to where it was giving off light. It was more, whatever the figure was made of light. It didn't have much movement at all, and there was no sound at all. It seemed like it was just kind of pacing right to left or doing something weird between the trees. He has no neighbors that are close to the location, because as I said, his forest is a couple acres, so there is no way it could have been a neighbor in his forest. To this day, the feeling that I got when I saw that still gives me shivers. Something so powerful that it meant a powerful vibe of fear and death. The fact that we went out to this forest at that time really late at night and happened to see that freaks me out as well, because it was clearly meant to be seen by us. If we went to any other location or went out any sooner or later, we might not have ever seen what it was that manifested in the forest at that moment of time. About 12 years ago, I used to live in a dome house. It's one of the only two in our town, and the other is a church. So it's very unique, not just in the architecture, but also in the story of its history. Behind the house I lived in was yet another, bigger dome, one we lived in the apartment contained within. We, meaning my best friend, who was also female like myself, and then her husband. My friend's husband informed me that when they were building the domes, a construction worker fell from the ceiling of the dome, which was around 3 stories up, to the concrete floor below. He obviously didn't survive. Fast forward 20 or so years, and we were living in the apartment just below the area where said workman fell. Feeling of that apartment was always as though someone was watching at all times. Nothing strange happened until we moved into the main house after the larger dome was demolished because of black mold. We moved in and the feeling of being watched continued, but eventually we got used to the feeling, except when it was so strong that it was unavoidable. Now there were many, many incidents of unexplainable things happening, like my friend getting out of the bath upstairs and feeling like a child wrapped his arms around her neck. Like my friend getting out of the bath upstairs and feeling a child wrap his arms around her naked waist and saying mama, or having my tarot cards just materialize from my bedroom upstairs to in front of the back door downstairs, or seeing a cowboy guy standing in the hallway that just disappeared. Also, every night just before falling asleep in one particular room, I would hear the loud bangs on the wall above my bed that would wake me right up. The most disturbing happening was one night I had gone to sleep in my bed upstairs. Now our stairs were spiral that went up to a landing, and all around the landing were bedroom doors, a door to the aforementioned bathroom, and the balcony. This particular night my best friend went to sleep on the couch beneath the balcony. Her husband had been activated in the army and was in Texas before deployment. I was passed out, and I said, in my bed, maybe a little after midnight, I wake up to her screaming my name. I leapt out of the bed, still in fog of sleepiness. I stopped at the balcony to see what had happened. Were you just throwing coins at me? She yells accusingly up at me. What? I said, no, I was passed out. That's not funny, Sam. Just tell me it was you. Her voice quivered with fear. No, I told you I was asleep, I said. This made her choke up. I went downstairs immediately. She told me that she was trying to sleep on the couch. Suddenly, we heard something metallic hit the wood floor next to the couch she was laying on. A minute or so later, another bounced off of the couch and fell onto the wood floor. Then, a coin landed on her. She jumped up and started screaming my name. The proof was on the floor. I saw it with my own eyes. Several pennies peppered the living room floor. After that, we went to bed downstairs in her bedroom. After I moved out months later, I never forgot that house. Many little things happened in the house, but nothing compared to that experience. It never happened again, and I'm glad that it didn't. Here are a few details I think you should know. I am a pretty tall and well-built female, so not much scares me. I was 18 at the time this happened, and just a memory of this thing still gives me panic attacks. I was working as a seasonal maintenance worker at one of the parks in the Cherokee National Forest. Often, I would get to work before the rangers and other workers, so that I could take care of the rescue animals. I arrived to work while it was still pitch black outside. I had to open the gate before entering the area where the maintenance building and the animal cages were. I went inside to start my morning routine and prepare the animals' food. I didn't bother to turn on the light since plenty filtered in through the 2 full-length windows that faced towards the road and the others towards the cages, so there was plenty of light to see by. As I started getting the food ready, I began to get this sense of creepy unease. I took a look outside for whatever was making me feel this way. All I could see was a little old woman with tan skin stumbling drunkenly down the road under the streetlights. People walking these roads weren't that unusual because there is a camping site down the road. Something was off. This little old lady or man or whatever it was didn't seem quite right. Somehow, my unease kept growing as they came closer. Just as precaution, I locked the front door, which is solid steel, to keep people from stealing equipment. The front gate was open and the man stumbled through. Keeping the lights off, I ran to the back to make sure the door was locked as well. I sprinted back when I heard the fox and owls making the most distressing sounds I had ever heard. I could see some frantically trying to get out of their cages while others hid. I thought it might be the old man at first, but what I saw crouching between the cages was something completely different. My unease had now turned into full-blown primal fear. Suddenly everything went completely silent. Then a voice that sounded like my boss, but not quite like him, more like someone trying to mimic the way he talked, called out, but I couldn't understand it. The thing began to come forward in a sort of lurch. Its eyes flinched open, and they were sickly green color. It seemed to glow like animals' eyes do when you shine a light on them in the dark. Then it dropped all fours and started crawling like some demonic creature from a horror movie toward me. Had shaggy, matted fur and a canine-like appearance. But like if you had mixed it with a human and then hit it with the car, cause it was just all so wrong. With a burst of speed, it stood up and slammed into the glass. Its breath fogged up the glass, and it must have stood a good 4 inches from my 5'9" frame. It wasn't huge, but at the time, it looked massive. I was frozen like a deer in the headlights, just staring at this thing. It unhinged its jaw, letting it hang loosely, and the strange voice that sounded a lot like my boss began pleading. "Maggie, open the door. I need your help." I backed up, feeling for the wrench that was just on the workbench. I was not going to take my eyes off this thing. In all my years of exploring these mountains, I have never seen anything like this creature. And no, I didn't think the wrench was going to do much against this thing. But what else was I supposed to do? It started, frantically saying, "Let me in. Help me." Each time the voice would change. Sometimes it would be my coworker. Other times, it would be my family's voices. All I could think was I just don't know what I could think. I just didn't want this thing to come in here and kill me. I'm not a religious person, but at the time I prayed for anyone to help me. I realized there was this foul stench of rotting meat in the air, and I had to fight, not to retch. The creature paced back and forth, clicking its teeth together as it looked frustrated. Without warning, it rounded the corner, started violently yanking at the door and shrieking, "Let me in, let me in." It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I was numb at this point, and all ready to fight for my life. As quickly as it started, it stopped, and the horrible smell began to disappear. I looked out the window in time to see this thing scale the fence and cross the road, disappearing into the forest. Seconds later, my boss came to the little door and almost collapsed in relief. Taking the wrench from me and sitting me down, I told him what had happened. I thought he wouldn't believe me, but his wrinkled face just grew stern and concerned, and in a voice that was not to be questioned, he told me to never talk about this creature or it will draw his attention. To never speak of it. And lastly, to never invite it in. If I followed these rules, then I should be fine. He's not sure what drew the creature's attention that morning, but for the rest of my time working there, nothing like this happened again. Sometimes, when I'm on the back trails, I can hear voices or smell that overwhelming stench of death. But hopefully, I never see this thing again. First of all, I would like to apologize for any grammar mistakes. I am from Eastern Europe, so English is not my first language. I've been following your channel for some time now, and I would like to share a story. It's not my personal story. This thing happened to a friend of mine. She and her husband were staying overnight at her parents' house. In the countryside, it's a small village, pretty compact, as the houses are close to each other. It's not at all secluded, but still pretty rural. They were staying in some kind of guest bedroom. The windows are facing down the street, so from this room, you can hear everything very well. If, for example, someone would be walking down the road. It was late at night, past midnight, and they were awoken by a terrible noise outside. Their dog woke up too, but he was too scared to come out from under the bed. He was just hiding there, growling from time to time. They say that they heard many horses riding down the street. The commotion was terrible and it went on for a while. They also heard chained as if the horses were dragging them. They were too frightened to get out of bed and look out the window to see what was happening. They felt like they shouldn't see. I know that explanations can be found, but as they described it, something was really wrong with the incident. Nobody there owned any horses. There were no wild horses around, and the creepiest part, no one else heard them, which was pretty impossible since they were extremely loud. They asked the parents the next day and the neighbors, but nobody besides them heard anything. They're religious people, and they were not drinking or consuming anything that could affect their lucidity. I honestly don't think that they would lie about it, or that they would deny any logical explanation for just the sake of being interested or something like that. They were really frightened about that night, and they are not sure what was going on, but they are sure something was wrong. All the loud commotion, the noises the horses were making while running, the change that described it all as coming straight from hell. Also, there are legends in the folklore saying that the devil travels around the world with his horses, and sometimes in remote cursed places you can meet him. Who knows? Maybe it was him passing by. I want to start this off by saying two things. One, I'm not a great writer and have a hazy memory of all that happened. I was actually asleep when this occurred, but I wasn't at the same time. And 2, this account is completely true, but you can believe what you want. I wouldn't believe it had it not happened to me. I was 8 years old at the time, and I had very vivid dreams and nightmares. I later found out that the dreams and nightmares I had weren't just dreams. To this day, I still don't understand why this happened or how. I've heard it called a few different names: astral projection, out-of-body experience, etc. The night in question led me to realize what had been happening years down the road. Keep in mind, this happened 5 years before Insidious came out, and I kind of repressed it up until seeing that movie. It wasn't the same as my encounter, but it was equally terrifying. We were a poor family, just my mother and her 3 children in a 1-bedroom apartment. Her boyfriend was there occasionally too, and I'm really glad he was there that night. My brother, who was 2 to 2.5 at the time, and I shared a bed that was in our dining room. My mom had her bed in her room, and my baby sister had a crib and a walk-in closet. She would have been about 6 months old at this point. There was this stain on the wall that was reminiscent of those paintings that follow your movement with their creepy eyes. I stared at this thing on multiple occasions, wondering what in the heck could have created such a weird stain. I had this creepy feeling when I looked at it. It seemed so familiar to me. I can only describe its appearance as some sort of demonic dragon man hybrid. The creepy red guy in Insidious had nothing on this thing, except they shared a similarity. They both had those creepy yellow eyes. The stain had been there a few months, and I woke up sweating and crying more and more. The night everything happened, however, I was stuck in the corner of my bedroom, very near to my ceiling. I remember looking down at my body beside my screaming brother, who was pointing to the other side of the room. The stain was on the exact other side of the wall from where this thing was. I could see my brother screaming at it and trying to wake me up, and every fiber of my being was trying to wake up, but some force was holding me back. I had this goosebump sensation run up my spine, and I looked over to the other side of the room as my mom and her boyfriend half ran into the room to see what was wrong. My mom's boyfriend was a big dude, and he was prepared to whoop ass if it was an intruder. I saw the creature right as they entered. To this day, I believe it's a demon, and I don't believe it's gone for good. My brother was screaming, "There's a man, he's a snake. He's here to take me and Johnny." Not my real name, but I prefer not to disclose that. My mom's boyfriend, we'll call him Jack, was a pretty ballsy dude and often bragged about the time that he came back to life after 30-some minutes when his truck was hit by a semi. Him being on the other side for those 30 minutes did something to him, though. Behind that tough guy's shell, he was actually more afraid of what was out there in the world than you could even imagine. Jack saw the whatever the heck you can call it in the corner. After hearing my brother screaming, and I mean, he actually saw it. And what's more, he turned his head my way, and then he saw me. Not the body in the bed snoring as all hell is going on the same room. The me in the corner opposite the monster. He hesitated for a minute and then left to the other room. He came back with what appeared to be a really old book. It wasn't an old Bible, though. It was something different. He started reading words from it aloud and inching towards the demon. The demon seemed to be annoyed by this. At this point, I felt like my life force was somehow being drained, and felt even more restricted by whatever force was holding me in place. Jack turns towards my general direction and almost seeming to look right through me at this point, like he couldn't see me anymore, and then he said in a reassuring tone, "God is sending us an extra pair of wings." He then slammed the book closed, and from it emanated this bright light. It engulfed the whole room, and I felt like the chains were being ripped away from my astral body. I could see the bright light pushing the monster into the wall, and just like that, it was out of the room. The light continued to grow, and I felt like I was being forced back into my body. And hours later, I woke up. I thought I just had the craziest dream ever, but upon waking up, I saw my mom pacing in the living room, and Jack was cleaning away the stain on the wall. At that point, I felt the presence leave, and didn't have another dream for the next 6 or so years, not even the regular ones, but that was completely fine by me. I verified this story with both my mom and her boyfriend a couple years later, and my mom freaked out that I knew as much as I did. After all, she saw me sitting there sleeping the whole time. She didn't see what was in that other plane with me, but she knew it was there nonetheless. I still have questions, and over the years I have gotten some answers. I did learn the demon's name later on from my little brother. I'm not going to share that, as it's unwise to share demon names, and I haven't been able to dig up any information on the name that I did get from my brother. But I do feel fear every time I think or say that word, so I know somehow my little brother was right. If you have any information that could help me solve this and get some closure, don't hesitate to comment. And if you ever have a run-in with a demon similar to the demon I ran into, call a priest, I have heard many stories on your channel, and I am glad I am not the only one who has had paranormal experiences. And that won't be the last one either. I was a bit hesitant to write my story, but I might as well give it a shot and tell it. I don't want to say my real name, but a lot of people call me Chris. Anyway, I have 2 stories to share. I am 25 years old, and I haven't experienced anything paranormal as an adult, but I can't say that I haven't experienced it in my childhood. The first paranormal experiences were in my home, a place where people should feel safe. The thing is, I don't remember much of it. But my parents do, and one day the conversation came up about the paranormal, and they decided to tell me things about the house that I don't recall or know about. My parents and I used to live in an apartment, but when I turned 3 years old, my parents and I moved into our current house, which was cheap back in the 1990s. It's not in a good or bad neighborhood, it's kind of just in a rural area. My parents told me that it was a very old house and was not in the best of conditions, but hey, it was home. Before my parents went on any further with the story, they informed me that the house was built in the late 1920s and has a history, but they wouldn't say what. They seemed hesitant. It creeped me out a bit, but I decided not to pry much into it. Something told me it was not a good idea, and I would regret knowing since I lived in the house for almost all my life. My mother told me that before we moved in, I was a cheerful child and always had a smile on my face. But while moving in the house, that all changed. She told me that I used to walk about and talk about death a lot, almost every day, and I would talk to myself most of the time. When she asked me who I was talking to, she said that I would not answer. It was like if I looked hesitant to answer. One day, I was in my own room while my parents were setting up the living room, when all of a sudden, my 3-year-old self came running into the living room. My face was all red and tears came down like a waterfall and I was screaming bloody murder, which scared the holy shit out of my parents. I told them, while pointing at my room, "There's an ugly mold man in my room." My dad went into the room, and once inside, he saw that no one else was there. My mom told me that it could have been my imagination trying to calm me down. I eventually refused to sleep in my room because of the old man. My dad had enough one day and told me whatever was in my room to please leave me alone, since I was just a child and was scared. Surprisingly, my parents told me that I went back to the room without any complaints. That should be the end, right? Wrong. After being told about my own paranormal experience, my parents told me that some of our family members experienced something paranormal in our home. I had an aunt and uncle who lived with us for 2 years. My aunt told my parents that she had paranormal experiences. My uncle was at work and my aunt was alone in the house cooking lunch. As she was cooking, she said that she couldn't help but feel that she was being watched, but ignored the feeling. However, my aunt told my parents that she heard magnets on the refrigerator moving. My aunt got scared and slowly turned, and what she saw made her scared beyond belief. She saw a little boy standing by the refrigerator. He wore clothing that looked to be from the 1930s. The boy was looking at her for a couple of seconds until he disappeared before her eyes. My aunt and uncle moved out to another state, but my dad told me that my aunt would never forget her experience in her house. After I moved to North Bay, Ontario, I noticed right away that there was something evil in the house. It started off simple enough with shuffling at night, which at first I thought it was one of our cats, so I didn't really think much of it. It eventually got to the point where we would start hearing our names called out of nowhere, being somewhat used to this from my previous house in Manitoba. Unfortunately, things only escalated from there. It affected me and my dad. We were mostly the ones that were there. We had this cold room in the back of the house that had a walk out into the backyard. No one in the family felt comfortable in that room. My dad was starting to get supper ready one evening, and as he was looking through the freezer, he heard a male voice say, "Ken," from right around the corner in the laundry room. Thinking nothing of it, he said, "What is it, Cam?" And no answer. He came out into the living room, which was downstairs as well. He asked me if I was calling him for something, and I responded no. Side note, I usually call my dad old man or dad. I never use his first name. Later that month, my dad and I were watching a ghost show on YouTube. The host asked, "If there are any demons here, make your presence known." Immediately, after the host said that, a bird flew into the glass on the window directly behind us. If that was either something paranormal or maybe just sheer luck. Towards the end of our first year in North Bay, my sister had seen a shadow person peeking out around the corner in the cold room, and it freaked her out. She had the feeling that something was in that house, and it was bad. After New Year's, I was playing on my brand new Xbox 360 in the basement, and directly to my left, my dad's recliner, a deep, guttural growl that lasted for a good 5 seconds emanated from it. Now, this is going to sound like BS, because most people would say fuck it and take off. But I paused my game, looked over directly at the noise, and told it, "Is that all you fucking got?" It reached a point where the paranormal activity had reached a daily occurrence. One evening, I was getting ready to go to bed and talking to my brother. I had finished chatting with my brother and was about to head upstairs to bed. As I'm turning the corner, my brother's cat ran out of my cousin's room, turned and hissed into the dark room. She immediately ran up to me and started climbing my leg, so I bent down to pick her up, and I was moving up. I saw a large, black mass rush past me and go up the stairs. So, I immediately talked to my brother about it, when my brother and I both saw an orb, with the lights on, mind you. It shot from the roof and into the floor. It was at this point that I was fed up with the bad vibes getting worse and worse, and performed a cleansing in that house. After that, I never saw anything again, but I'm not sure if it worked for the people who moved in after us. Apparently after 2 years, my parents told me that they sold that house. It was up for sale for a long time, and that's about how long it took for everything to reach the point where I performed the cleansing. I've had my experiences off and on over the years, but it would be a very, very long story. I will share some of my most recent experiences. When I was looking for houses earlier this year, the first I had to look at was an original church from my town in southern Manitoba. I went inside and didn't feel much on the first floor until I went upstairs and felt a very sad presence in the hall of the upstairs. I left not being able to do much for the spirit as I was only there for a short while. But as I was leaving, I looked up to the second-story window and saw a woman looking down at me from the window. This other house was way worse though. The moment we pulled up onto the property, I just felt weird. While my realtor was opening the shop, I was drawn to the second-floor window and I saw a younger woman looking at me, just like the other house. We went inside the house and was immediately drawn to the basement, a creepy cellar of all places, that was low and had terrible lighting. I'm standing down there feeling more and more sick, and I tell my sister that there's something bad in this house. As I made my way through the house, I felt more sick and dizzy, and it was way worse on the second floor. I had to hold onto the wall in order to keep myself from falling over. I eventually had enough and had to walk out of the house and let my sister and the realtor look for the last few things. I felt better after getting out of the house, and when we went to leave to go get some supper, as we were leaving, I looked at the house and I see a complete, black hooded figure standing in the window staring at me. I couldn't see anything but the shape of the hood in jet black, but I could feel it staring at me. I told it that it can't follow me or anyone I was in the car with. I haven't sensed it since, and that was almost 3 months ago now. But I hope I don't come into contact with that energy again.